If you sat through the Carlson-Huckabee interview this past week, you heard Tucker Carlson attack Christian Zionism by questioning the very basis of the Jewish claim to the land of Israel. Is it religious? Is it ethnic? He even cited a famous court case where a Jewish convert to Christianity was denied the right of return. So let's talk about Tucker's question and the half-truths and the reality of the law and the history, plus the potential they represent for the West. I'm Ilana Maisel-Diamant, and this is Basic Law. Okay, two things before we proceed. First, Carlson's effort was designed to undermine the morality of the Israeli story, lampoon Christian Zionism, and distort facts to fit a narrative attacking the very concept of the nation-state. I think a point-for-point rebuttal would be a waste of time, and this show focuses only on a specific issue that is important to address. Second, I refuse to argue with Carlson or anyone else about the Jewish rights to life, liberty, and homeland, and that goes doubly for people who seem to think that those things are negotiable. The Jewish people walked this land before Rome was an empire, prayed toward Jerusalem, and returned through millennia of exile. We belonged to this land, bled for it, and dreamed of it while most modern nations had yet to exist. Our moral, religious, historical, and national claim is beyond question. Now, how we have codified that claim in law is a more complex issue, and that brings us to the interview. In one particular exchange, Tucker attacked the biblical claim to Israel and the Zionist Christian application of that claim to the modern state. Now, he did this in part by questioning the ethnic and religious claims of contemporary Jewry to the land and how they're expressed in state policy. So that's already a tremendous leap in logic because laws are often the product of political compromise and not pure moral philosophy. But let's get to the meat of the argument. Carlson tried provoking Huckabee by raising Israel's law of return, which grants Jews automatic citizenship when they immigrate to Israel. But there's a caveat. It doesn't apply to individuals who are born Jewish but who have converted to a different religion. Carlson used this exception on conversion to try and drive a wedge between Jews and Christian Zionists. He asked, well, if the Jewish claim to Israel is ethnic, how can the religious exception exist? Now, the question itself is based on a misunderstanding of Jewish identity, maybe purposeful, and we'll get to that. But the implication was that the ethnic claim was therefore poor or false. Plus, of course, he continued in his attempts to falsely portray Christians as persecuted in Israel. And we're going to discuss all of that. The 2026 JNS International Policy Summit will take place April 15th through 17th at the Waldorf Astoria in Jerusalem. Register today at jns-summit.org and use the coupon code JNSTV. That is JNSTV, one word, to receive 20% off all tickets. I look forward to seeing you in Jerusalem. So in building his straw man, Carlson invoked a famous court decision known as the Brother Daniel case. He didn't mention it by name, but that's 100% what he was talking about. And it's worth discussing because if you know the history, the case doesn't prove what Carlson hoped it would. This was decided in 1962, and it was a very difficult landmark ruling. A man born Shmuel Oswald Rufeisen saved hundreds of Jews during the Nazi occupation of Poland. While sheltering in a convent, he converted to Christianity and became a Catholic priest, Brother Daniel. In 1958, I think, he applied to immigrate to Israel as a Jew under the law of return. Now, the Ministry of Interior here refused his application, and the Supreme Court ended up having to decide, can a convert to Christianity still claim Jewish status for this immigration purpose? The court ultimately ruled in favor of the state's position. While Brother Daniel remained Jewish under the religious definition, for the purposes of the secular law of return, the court held that an applicant could not be both Jewish and Christian. Now, despite the ruling, this story ends happily for Brother Daniel, because though he lost the right to automatic citizenship, he just went through a normal naturalization process and lived as an Israeli citizen and a monk at the Stella Maris Monastery for 35 years. In his will, he left these moving words. I experienced everything in my lifetime, and I no longer fear death. I am afraid of memory. I don't know if I am to be doomed or spared, but from all the things you may know about me, I would like you to remember that I was born a Jew and died a Jew. This quote captures a complexity that Jews are navigating still today, defining the boundaries of a Jewish identity in a modern world that blew it wide open. Now, between the late 18th and early 20th centuries, European Jewish identity, previously national, religious, and ethnic all in one, began to unravel as Jews received the opportunity to fully participate in Western society. To this point, Jews were persecuted through discrimination and significant violence depending on the historical period. And when Jews gained citizenship in successive European countries, their integration was often at the cost of redefining religious practice or belief. Modern movements, including Orthodoxy, Conservative, and Reform Judaism, are all products of this shift. Jews have spent over 200 years navigating what their proud and often successful integration has meant for them individually and as a collective. We are an ancient nation which has adapted itself to the challenges of modernity and to Western categories of identity that don't fully fit the bill. Now, today, these debates remain central to the project of rebuilding the Jewish homeland, and they are not about opposition to any other religion, but rather about what we are and are not. This is the internal conversation that has preserved the Jewish people through time and against all odds. Now, the law of return is just one piece of that puzzle. It was first passed in 1950, 2 years after the establishment of the state, 5 years after the Holocaust. And it was only 11 years after the British had severely limited Jewish immigration to the Mandate at a time when millions may have been saved. It's also worth remembering that at this point in history, the relationship between the Catholic Church and Judaism was still deeply strained in comparison to that of today. Only in 1965, 3 years after the Brother Daniel case, did the Vatican issue Nostra Aetate. It was the first time in nearly 2,000 years that the Church had officially condemned the persecution of Jews and repudiated the deicide charge. This was a massive turning point, but in historical terms, the warming of relations was still in its infancy. Our modern relationship should be respected and nourished and cherished, but in part, that requires a proper understanding of just how starkly different the before and after pictures are. Now, after the loss of a third of the Jewish people, and during the years of the expulsion of Jews from Arab lands, this law offered Jews refuge. And in that offer lies the heart of the state of Israel. It is a civil government which cares deeply, of course, for ensuring a thriving democracy for all of its citizens. But its primary purpose is to protect the homeland of the Jewish nation for those who wish to or need to rejoin it. Now, over time, the coverage of the law of return has expanded, though not without many controversies that I hope to explore in future shows. Today, the right to immigrate is granted to those born of a Jewish mother or who have converted to Judaism, their children and grandchildren, and the spouses of all of the above, whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish. The exception on conversion still exists, but under the current rules, even someone with a Jewish grandmother can immigrate under the right of return if they were raised Christian, and this has been the case for hundreds of thousands of people. This track is also separate from the citizenship that passes naturally to the children or spouse of any Israeli, regardless of religion, and the tens of thousands who have entered seeking asylum, and the small number of non-Jews who have naturalized in other ways. Now, look, even before we get to the larger discussion on biblical claims to the land, countries are supposed to control their borders. They can choose to prefer certain groups for immigration. And while Carlson seemed to turn his nose up at the very idea of ethnic criteria for citizenship, this is a commonly used criteria in many countries whose existence apparently gives him less heartburn. Until 2024, Italy granted citizenship to descendants going back to 1861. Until 2000, German law prioritized the naturalization of ethnic Germans living abroad. Ireland offers citizenship to the grandchildren of citizens. Armenia's constitution simplifies citizenship for those of Armenian origin. Hungary offers citizenship to those who can show an unbroken line to at least one direct Hungarian ancestor. Now, we can get into the unique features of the law of return in a different show, but there's a shared premise here that should be stressed. Sovereign states have the right to determine which immigration they prioritize in their national self-interest. This is self-determination, and it gives weight and substance to the identity that these states have considered important enough to live and die for. Here's the broader point for the West. Speaking openly about questions of identity has become increasingly difficult in Western states. In an age when borders, nationhood, and self-definition have fallen into disrepute, Israel's willingness to wrestle with these questions openly becomes more striking. Israeli and Jewish debates are messy, and they're vital. They keep us connected to an identity that has survived under impossible conditions. We argue about who belongs, what obligations we have, how to preserve identity while honoring civil rights for all. Western countries are waking up to these same questions, and in that process, they should look to the Israeli case to understand how to navigate those very complex debates over time and with success. Carlson's ahistorical approach to the conversation with Huckabee was just one of many tactics deployed to ensure that their conversation went nowhere fast. But for those willing to take history seriously, to grapple with its consequences, to learn its lessons, there are richer conversations waiting to be had. See you next week.